Margaret Hale woke up to the soft rustle of leaves brushing against her window. It was a cool Sunday morning in Vermont, the kind where the air smelled of pine and the distant lake shimmered through a light fog. Her cottage stood quietly at the edge of town, surrounded by maple trees turning gold and red. Mornings like these were her favorite, peaceful, calm, predictable. She brewed her tea, sat by the kitchen window, and watched a squirrel chase after a falling acorn. Life had become a series of small, comforting routines. That was how she liked it, steady and quiet after a lifetime of storms. Then the doorbell rang. Margaret froze. No one ever visited her unannounced. Her daughter-in-law, Julia, lived several states away. Her neighbors usually called before stopping by. For a few seconds, she thought she might have imagined the sound. But then it rang again, louder this time, echoing through the stillness. She set her teacup down, wiped her hands on her apron, and slowly walked to the door. When she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. Standing there on the porch, half soaked from the morning drizzle, was a young man with a worn backpack slung over one shoulder. His brown hair was messy, his jacket a little too big for his frame. And his blue eyes, those eyes looked painfully familiar. It took Margaret a moment to find her voice. "Evan," she whispered. Her grandson looked up at her, uncertain and exhausted. "Hi, Grandma," he said softly. "Can I stay here for a while?" The world seemed to stop for a heartbeat. Margaret hadn't seen Evan since her son's funeral 2 years ago. The family had drifted apart after that. Too many words left unspoken, too many wounds that time hadn't managed to heal. Seeing him now, older, taller, but still with that same nervous half-smile, brought tears to her eyes. Of course, she finally said, stepping aside. "Come in, sweetheart." Evan hesitated, as if unsure whether he was really welcome, then stepped into the house. His shoes squeaked softly on the wooden floor. Margaret noticed how he kept glancing around, taking in the old furniture, the framed photos, the scent of her cinnamon candles. It was as if he was trying to remember something that had long faded. "You must be freezing," she said, rushing to the kitchen. "Sit down. I'll make you something warm." He nodded, setting his backpack by the couch. "Thanks, Grandma. I didn't mean to just show up. I didn't know where else to go." Her heart ached at his words. "You'll always have a place here," she said firmly, handing him a cup of hot tea. "Your family." For a while, they sat quietly. The sound of rain against the window filled the silence between them. Margaret studied him closely, the faint shadows under his eyes, the way his hand shook slightly when he lifted his cup. She could tell he had been through something he didn't want to say yet. So she said gently, "What brings you here, Evan? Something happened at home?" He looked down. "Not exactly. I just needed a break. Mom's been busy. Everything's just been a mess lately." Margaret wanted to ask more, but she stopped herself. She knew that luck, she'd seen it in her son years ago, that quiet mix of pride and pain. If she pushed too hard, he'd close off. So she simply smiled. "Then this is the right place for a break. You can stay as long as you like." He gave her a small, grateful smile. "Thanks, Grandma." Later that day, Margaret showed him to the guest room, the same room he used to stay in as a child. The one with the little bookshelf and the old quilt she'd made years ago. The air smelled faintly of lavender. Evan ran his hand along the windowsill, smiling faintly at the carved initials he had made as a boy E+J for him and his sister Jamie. "Still here?" he murmured. Margaret chuckled. "I never had the heart to sand it off." For the first time that day, Evan laughed. It was soft but real, and it warmed her heart more than any fire could. As evening settled, they had dinner together, simple stew and bread. The kind Margaret always made when someone she loved was home. They talked a little about his college, about the town, about how fast time had gone. But under every word there was something unspoken, something heavy. When the dishes were done, Margaret sat by the fireplace, knitting, while Evan stared into the flames. She could tell his thoughts were somewhere far away. He seemed lost, restless, carrying something he wasn't ready to share, you know? She said quietly, "Your grandfather used to sit just like that when something was bothering him. He'd stare at the fire until he found the courage to talk about it." Evan looked at her, eyes thoughtful. Did he always find the courage? She smiled faintly. Eventually, a fire crackled softly between them. Outside, the rain had turned into a gentle drizzle. The whole house seemed wrapped in a kind of calm that felt fragile, like the pause before a confession. When Evan finally went to bed, Margaret lingered downstairs. She cleaned the cups, folded a towel, and tried to steady her racing thoughts. Why had he come here, really? What was he running from? She walked to the old photo frame on the mantel, her son, Mark, smiling with his arm around a much younger Evan. It was taken on a fishing trip years ago. The boy in the picture had eyes full of hope. The young man upstairs now carried something different, something broken. Margaret touched the frame gently. "Oh, Mark," she whispered, "I wish you were here to guide him." Upstairs, the creak of a floorboard broke her thoughts. She looked up toward Evan's room. The light was still on. He wasn't sleeping either. That night, as Margaret lay in bed, she couldn't rest. The air felt heavy with memories and questions. Her mind replayed the moment he had appeared on her porch, the way his voice shook, the sadness in his eyes. She knew this wasn't just a visit. Something deeper had brought him here, something that had nothing to do with needing a place to stay. And though she didn't know it yet, the truth would uncover more than just his secret sit, would awaken hers too, as the clock ticked past midnight. She stared at the ceiling, her heart uneasy. The quiet she once loved now felt strange, alive, almost waiting. And for the first time in years, Margaret felt that her peaceful world was about to change forever. Outside, the rain stopped. The moonlight slipped through the curtains, casting silver lines across the room. Somewhere in the silence, she heard the faint sound of a drawer closing upstairs. She thought of knocking on his door, but didn't. She'd wait just one more night, but in her heart she already knew. The moment she opened that door this morning, life had shifted. Something had come back to her, not just her grandson, but the past, the love, and the pain she had long buried. She turned on her side, closed her eyes, and whispered into the quiet, "Please, let me get this right this time." And as the house fell into stillness, she couldn't shake the feeling that the doorbell that morning had opened more than just her front door, had opened something inside her that she thought was gone forever. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the lace curtains, and the smell of coffee filled this small Vermont cottage. Margaret stood by the stove, flipping pancakes as she listened to the faint creak of footsteps upstairs. Evan had slept late, which didn't surprise her. He looked exhausted last night. She poured syrup into a small jar and smiled softly when she heard him come down the stairs. "Morning, Rama," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, sweetheart." "Sit down. You need a real breakfast," she said, sliding a plate in front of him. He smiled faintly but ate quietly. There was something distant in his eyes, a quiet storm she could feel but not see. She tried to fill the silence with gentle conversation, talking about the weather, the neighbor's new dog, the book she'd been reading, but Evan seemed lost in his thoughts. When she asked, "How long are you planning to stay?" he hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't know yet." Margaret nodded, pretending not to notice the unease in his tone. She didn't want to push him. Not yet. After breakfast, she cleaned the dishes while Evan wandered through the house. He paused by old photographs, his fingers brushing across the glass. One picture showed his father, Mark, at 10 years old, grinning, covered in mud, holding a wooden toy boat. Evan smiled faintly at it, then moved on. Later that afternoon, Margaret found him in the living room, staring at the fireplace mantel. "You have a lot of memories here," he said quietly. "This house has seen everything," she replied. "Love, fights, laughter, heartbreak. It's all in these walls." He looked at her, a question lingering behind his eyes, but he didn't ask it. Instead, he said, "I think I'll go explore the attic." Margaret's heart skipped. The attic. It had been locked for years, full of boxes and memories she had tried to keep buried. But she couldn't stop him. Maybe it was time. "The key's in the kitchen drawer," she said softly. "Be careful. The steps are old." Evan thanked her and went upstairs. She tried to stay calm, but her hands trembled as she wiped the counter. That attic held pieces of a past she never wanted him to see, not because it was dark, but because it was painful. Upstairs, dust floated in the sunlight as Evan pushed the attic door open. The air smelled of cedar and thyme. He stepped inside, ducking under old beams. Boxes were stacked neatly along the wall, each labeled with names. Christmas. Robert's things. Mark's room. He ran his fingers across them until one caught his eye, an old wooden chest with brass corners. It looked different from the rest. He knelt beside it, heart pounding for reasons he couldn't explain. When he opened it, he found letters, dozens of them, tied with faded blue ribbon. Some were yellowed with age, others still crisp. The top one was addressed to Margaret Hale in a handwriting he didn't recognize. Curious, he opened it. The words made his breath catch. It was a letter from his grandfather, Robert Hale, written years before Evan was even born. The letter spoke of regret, love, and a search. Robert had been trying to find his son, Evan's father, after a fight that had split the family apart. He had written about trying to make peace, about the nights he couldn't sleep, thinking of his boy. Evan's throat tightened as he read. His grandfather had wanted to make things right, but the words hinted he never got the chance. Grandpa tried to find Dad, he whispered. When Margaret came upstairs to call him for lunch, she froze in the doorway. The attic light was dim, and Evan sat on the floor, surrounded by old letters. His eyes were red, his face pale. "Evan," she said carefully, "what are you doing?" He looked up at her, his voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" Grandpa tried to find Dad before he died. He wanted to fix things. Margaret's heart sank. She stepped forward, her voice soft but trembling. "I didn't think you needed to know. It was too painful." "You hid it from me," he said, his tone breaking. "From everyone." She swallowed hard. "Evan, I thought I was protecting you. Those letters were written during a terrible time. Your father and grandfather. They had a fight before Robert got sick. He tried to make peace, but he passed away before they met again." Evan stared at the letters in disbelief. "So they never spoke again?" Margaret shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "No, and your father never forgave himself for it." The room fell silent. Dust drifted in the air like ghosts of the past. Evan ran his hands through his hair, trying to process it all. "He never told me any of this. He just said Grandpa didn't understand him." Margaret sighed deeply. "He was right, in a way. Your father wanted to live differently, make choices Robert couldn't accept. I was caught in the middle. And when Robert got sick, I didn't want to burden Mark with guilt. So I kept the letters." Evan stood, pacing. "You should have told us, Grandma. We had a right to know." "I know," she said softly. "But I was afraid. Afraid of losing the little piece we had left." The truth hung between them, heavy and painful. Evan wanted to be angry, but seeing her eyes filled with regret softened something inside him. He realized that maybe she had suffered more than he ever knew, losing a husband, then a son, and now facing the past through him. "I didn't mean to find them," he said quietly. "I was just curious." "I know you didn't," she replied. "But maybe it's good you did. Maybe it's time these secrets stop hiding in the dark." Evan nodded, folding one of the letters carefully. Grandpa wrote that he wanted Dad to know he was proud of him, no matter what. He said he loved him. Margaret's breath caught. "I didn't know that part," she whispered. He handed her the letter. "Maybe it's not too late for you to forgive yourself." They stood there together, surrounded by the quiet weight of memory. The attic that once held sorrow now felt strangely alive, a place where pain and love finally met again. After a long silence, Margaret placed the letters back into the chest. "Your grandfather was a good man," she said. "He made mistakes, but he never stopped loving this family. I think he'd be glad you found these." Evan nodded. "I think so too." As they went downstairs, Margaret glanced back at the attic one last time. It no longer looked like a room full of ghosts. It looked like a doorway to healing. That night, neither of them spoke much. Evan sat by the fire, holding one of the old letters in his hand, reading it over and over. Margaret watched him from the kitchen, her heart aching with both sorrow and strange relief. The truth was finally out. The walls she had built around her memories were starting to crack, letting in light. Before heading to bed, Evan looked at her and said quietly, "Grandpa wanted peace. Maybe that's what we both need now." Margaret nodded. "Yes, my dear. Maybe that's what this visit is for." But as she turned off the light, she caught a glimpse of Evan slipping something into his pocket. One of the letters. She didn't ask which one. Some truths, she thought, were meant to be carried quietly. And in that small Vermont house under the whispering rain, 2 generations finally began to heal from a silence that had lasted too long. Evening came softly over the Vermont hills, painting the sky in gold and violet hues. The quiet cottage glowed with the warm light of the fireplace. Margaret sat in her old armchair, knitting slowly, her thoughts far away. Evan sat across from her, staring into the flames, lost in the storm of emotions the attic had stirred. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, memories, and the weight of what they had discovered. After a long silence, Evan finally spoke. "I didn't mean to upset you earlier, Grandma," he said quietly, his voice low. "I just didn't know Grandpa went through all that." Margaret looked up from her knitting, her heart aching at the guilt in his tone. "You didn't upset me, dear. You told me the truth. I should have shared those letters long ago." Evan stared at the fire, his jaw tight. "Dad always said he and Grandpa were different, but he never told me they stopped speaking. I thought they just drifted apart." "They loved each other," Margaret said softly. "But sometimes love isn't enough when pride gets in the way. Your father wanted to live life on his terms. Robert wanted him to follow tradition. They both thought time would fix things. But time ran out." Her voice trembled on the last words. Evan turned to look at her and saw tears glistening in her eyes. For a moment, he saw not just his grandmother, but a woman who had carried decades of quiet pain. "Did you ever try to make them talk again?" he asked gently. Margaret sighed. "I tried, Evan. God knows I did. But they were both stubborn. I remember the night your father left. Robert sat in that chair all night, waiting for him to come back. The next morning, he went to look for him, but by then, Mark was gone." She paused, her eyes distant. "When Robert got sick years later, he wrote those letters hoping to find peace. But fate didn't give him the chance." Evan's chest tightened. Dad carried that guilt his whole life. I think it broke him more than he ever admitted. "I know," she whispered, "and I think it broke me too." The fire crackled, and the soft orange light danced across their faces. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees. Margaret set her knitting down and looked at Evan fully. "Evan," she said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you too." He turned to her, curious but cautious. "I wasn't just angry with your father for leaving," she continued. "I was angry because he didn't say goodbye. He left this house one evening after a fight with me. I told him terrible things in the heat of the moment, things a mother should never say. When I found out he'd gone for good, I thought he'd never forgive me." Her voice shook. "When I got the news of his accident, my first thought wasn't sorrow, it was regret. I thought if only I'd told him I was proud of him just once." Evan felt a lump in his throat. He'd never heard his grandmother speak with such raw honesty. "Grandma," he began, but she shook her head gently. "I know, dear. I can't change what's done. But maybe by telling you, I can stop history from repeating itself." Evan leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. The weight of family pain, the silence, the pride, the missed goodbyes, it all pressed down on him. "I think that's why I came here," he said after a pause. "Not just to get away, but to find answers. I've been feeling lost for a long time." Margaret watched him carefully. Lost how? He hesitated, staring at the fire as if searching for the right words. "After Dad died, I didn't know who to be anymore. Mom kept saying I had his strength, but I didn't feel strong. I dropped out of my classes last semester. I didn't tell her. I told everyone I needed time off, but the truth is I was failing. I couldn't focus. Everything reminded me of him." Margaret's heart ached. "Oh, Evan," she whispered. "I thought coming here might help," he continued. I remembered how peaceful this place felt when I was a kid. I thought maybe being around you would make me feel grounded again. Margaret smiled sadly. You don't need to be perfect to make your father proud. He'd just want you to live with kindness and courage. Evan swallowed hard. That's the thing, Grandma. I don't even know what I want anymore. I keep thinking about what he would have done, what Grandpa expected, what Mom wants, but not what I want. Margaret reached out and placed her wrinkled hand on his. Then start with one small truth. Evan, what do you want right now? He looked at her, eyes glassy. I just want to feel like I belong somewhere again. Her fingers tightened gently around his. Then you already do. You belong here with family, with love, with forgiveness. That's what home means. For a long moment, neither spoke. The house felt alive again, filled with something tender and fragile, like a wound finally beginning to close. But just as Margaret thought they had reached the calm after the storm, Evan took a deep breath and said, There's something else I haven't told you. Her heart skipped. What is it, dear? Evan hesitated, his eyes flickering between fear and hope. I didn't just come here to get away. I came because I made a decision. I'm leaving for Boston next month. I got accepted into a college there. Margaret blinked, surprised. That's wonderful, Evan. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I'm scared, he admitted. I'm scared I'll fail again. I didn't even tell Mom yet. I thought if I told you and you believed in me, maybe I could believe in myself too. Margaret felt tears well up again, but this time they were warm and full of pride. She took his hand in both of hers. Evan, your grandfather spent his life chasing forgiveness. Your father spent his life chasing understanding. Don't spend yours chasing approval. Live for yourself. You deserve to start fresh. Evan nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. You really think I can do it? I know you can, she said, her voice steady. You're a hail. We bend, but we don't break. The firelight flickered across their faces as they smiled through tears. It wasn't a loud or dramatic moment, but it was real, deep, and full of meaning. For the first time in years, Margaret felt light again. The ghosts of her past had finally been heard, and in their place stood a young man ready to carry the family's story forward. The grandfather's search, the father's guilt. The mother's silence said all found peace in that quiet confession by the fire. When Evan finally stood to go to bed, he paused by her chair and said softly, Thank you, Grandma, for forgiving the past, and for believing in me. She smiled up at him. Thank you for coming home, Evan. I didn't know how much I needed you here until you arrived. As he went upstairs, Margaret watched the fire burn low. The house was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. No longer lonely, but calm and full of life. She looked at the old photo on the mantel, the one with Robert and Mark smiling together. For the first time in years, she whispered, We're okay now. He's okay. Then she turned off the light and went to bed, her heart lighter than it had been in decades. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the end of the story. Evan had one more truth to face, and morning would bring another turning. Point neither of them could yet imagine. Morning sunlight poured through the curtains, painting golden stripes across the old wooden floor. Margaret woke earlier than usual, the memory of last night's conversation still fresh in her mind. For the first time in years, her heart felt light. Something inside her had shifted, like a door long sealed had finally opened. She could hear soft footsteps in the kitchen and the faint clatter of cups. Evan was awake. That alone made her smile. She found him standing by the window, holding a steaming mug of coffee, looking out toward the hills. His hair was messy, and the early lights softened the sadness that had once lived in his face. He looked peaceful. For the first time since he'd arrived, he looked like he belonged there. Morning, Grandma, he said, smiling slightly. Good morning, sweetheart. You're up early, she replied. Couldn't sleep much, he said. Too many thoughts in my head. Margaret poured herself tea and sat at the table. Thoughts are good, she said. It means your heart's working. Evan chuckled, sitting down across from her. You always know how to make things sound wise. I've had practice, she said warmly. Now tell me, what are those thoughts about? Evan hesitated for a moment, then leaned forward. It's about what I told you last night. About college. Margaret's smile grew. Boston, wasn't it? He nodded. Yeah, I got accepted. Full scholarship. It's a dream come true, Grandma. But I'm scared to leave. Scared to fail again. Scared to let everyone down. She studied his face carefully, then reached out and placed her hand over his. Evan, do you know what courage is? It's not the absence of fire, it's moving forward despite it. You've already proven you're brave just by being honest about your fears. He looked down, his voice quiet. I don't want to make the same mistakes Dad did. I want to live differently. Margaret nodded slowly. Then do it. Learn from the past, but don't live in it. Your father and grandfather loved deeply, but they both struggled to let go of guilt. You don't have to carry that too. Her words lingered in the air like sunlight. Evan felt something inside him loosen. You think Dad would be proud? He asked softly. She smiled with a trembling lip. I know he would be. He'd be proud that you're trying, that you're brave enough to start over. He'd want you to go and make something beautiful out of your life. For a long while, they sat quietly, sipping their drinks, the world outside calm and bright. The sound of birds filtered through the open window, mixing with the soft rustle of the wind. Later that morning, Margaret took Evan up to the attic once more. The air was cooler now, and the dust seemed lighter, as if even the house had let go of its sorrow. She walked over to the old chest, opened it, and carefully lifted one of the letters. This, she said, handing it to him, was Robert's last letter. I never mailed it. It was meant for your father. Evan took the letter, his hands trembling slightly. He unfolded it and began to read. The words were simple, yet powerful. My dear son, if this reaches you, know that pride kept me silent, not lack of love. Forgive an old man for his mistakes. I wish I could tell you in person that you were my greatest joy. By the time he finished, Evan's eyes were wet. He folded the letter gently, holding it against his chest. He did love Dad, he whispered. Margaret nodded. Yes, and now you know. You can carry the truth forward, not the pain. He smiled through tears. I think that's what I needed all along. To understand them, to forgive them. Margaret placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. And maybe to forgive yourself, too. They spent the rest of the morning going through the chest together, not with sadness, but with tenderness. They laughed at old photos, smiled at forgotten trinkets, and remembered stories Margaret hadn't told in years. The attic, once filled with grief, now felt alive with warmth and memory. By afternoon, the sky had turned bright blue. They went outside to the porch with lemonade and sat in rocking chairs, the golden leaves swirling around them. I used to sit out here with your grandfather every evening, Margaret said softly. He'd talk about his dreams even when he knew he was running out of time. He always believed that no matter how far apart we drift, family finds its way back. Evan looked at her, smiling gently. He was right. For a while, they didn't need to speak. The quiet between them was full of peace, not distance. It was a silence that felt earned, a silence built on understanding and love. Then Evan turned to her and said, Grandma, when I go to Boston, I'll visit often. I promise. You won't be alone. Margaret chuckled softly. Oh, I'll be fine. This house will keep me company. Besides, I'll have your letters. You'll write, won't you? Evan grinned. Every week. Just like Grandpa did. Her eyes softened. Good, then maybe history can rewrite itself the right way this time. As evening approached, Evan helped her prepare dinner, something simple but warm. They cooked together, laughing over burnt bread and mismatched spices. The house, which had once felt so still and quiet, was now filled with the sounds of clinking plates and shared laughter. When night finally settled, they returned to the porch. The sky above was full of stars, brighter than Margaret had seen in years. Evan leaned back, sighing. You know, Grandma, before I came here, I thought I'd lost everything. My confidence, my purpose, even myself. But being here, It made me realize I still have something worth holding on to. What's that? She asked gently. Family, he said, and hope. Margaret smiled, her eyes glistening in the starlight. That's all anyone really needs. A comfortable silence fell between them. Crickets sang in the distance, and a soft breeze carried the scent of pine through the air. For the first time in a long time, Margaret felt whole. She reached over, took Evan's hand, and gave it a light squeeze. Promise me something. Evan, she said. Anything, he replied. Promise me you'll live your life fully. Don't let fear or regret guide your choices. Love deeply. Forgive easily. And always remember this house. This heart will always be your home. He looked at her, his eyes bright with emotion. I promise, Grandma. I'll make you proud. You already have, she whispered. The moon rose high above them, silver and calm. They stayed on the porch long after the lights went out inside, just to souls bound by love, time, and the healing power of truth. When Evan finally went to bed that night, Margaret lingered outside a little longer, gazing up at the stars. Somewhere in the quiet, she felt her husband's presence, gentle, forgiving, at peace. She smiled and whispered, They're okay now, Robert. He's going to be just fine. Inside, the house was warm and still. Upstairs, Evan slept soundly for the first time in months, clutching his grandfather's letter close to his chest as dawn approached. A golden light began to creep across the horizon. Margaret knew life would soon return to its quiet rhythm, but something had changed forever. The doorbell that rang that rainy morning had not just brought her grandson home. It had brought her family's heart back to life. And as she watched the first light of a new day fill her home, she thought softly, what happened still feels unreal, but maybe that's what miracles are meant to feel like.